So this is all occurring, and then we get to December. And in December, I fell asleep at the wheel 5 minutes from my home and crashed my car with my daughter
Mm.
inside.
Mm.
I
Oh my gosh.
drove into a road sign literally on my street. And, thank God that is all that happened. And thank God that road sign was there because it was about 2 feet away from a tree that I
Mm.
would have hit had it not been there and woken up in time. Um, but I remember like coming to and just being like, oh my goodness, like how could that happen? And I remember 5 seconds ago. So
Yeah.
how could my body have just shut down that way? And so of course, because I'm still not recognizing the problem, I'm like, I must have a sleep disorder. I am exhausted all of the
Of
time.
course,
This
the problem is
Right.
must
not the
be.
job.
No, it's not this cortisol. It's not the stress. I just
Yeah.
am not getting enough rest.
Welcome back to another episode of Breaking the Law. Our goal here is to help folks understand that the traditional approach to law is broken. It's breaking people, and as a result, it's time to break away from that traditional model and really pursue an ideal that we call better law. Attorneys have so much good to create in the world, but where we are right now, in many instances, it's just not working. My name is Sam Foreman. I am the co-host of this wonderful, glorious, amazing podcast called Breaking the Law. We're very humble here as well, as
The
everyone can
best
attest to.
podcast that ever was podcasted.
Yeah, no, exactly. This is the world's #1 podcast that we are doing right now. I'm the founder of Foreman Law. Our big focus is mergers and acquisitions and business law. And one of the best things in my life right now is, well, actually, this happened a while ago, but my oldest made me a custom Lego set.
Whoa.
Right. Yeah. Like he designed this out. He spent hours drawing directions, like step-by-step
Oh
directions.
my gosh.
And he had it quote unquote shipped to our house. So my wife texted me one day. She's like, "Hey, there's going to be a package on the doorstep. Act surprised. Make sure you bring it in." And so I bring it in, and my son, he's like hopping around. He's like all excited. And so I open it. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, what is this?"
Oh.
And we had so much fun putting that together. It was wonderful. I am a very lucky dad. I have 2 wonderful kids, and that's the best part of my life right now. So, Ashlyn, why don't you
That.
introduce yourself?
Okay.
And yeah.
My name is Ashley Linscott. I am the other co-host of this amazing, fabulous, wonderful podcast and dear friend of Sam's. I guess
Mm.
he's a dear friend of mine. I don't know. I assume I'm his dear friend,
We're
but
dear friends. We're not moose friends. We're dear friends. Go
right.
on.
Specific. He's less
Thank
of a
you for
friend
laughing at the
now
dad joke.
than he
Yeah.
was, but it's still there. I am the founder of a law firm called AD Legal. And I also am a parent. And my favorite thing in my life right now is that we just moved. And some mornings, if I can get my life together enough, I get to be present for walking my kids to the school bus. And those like 2-second walks truly make my morning, and being able to spend some time with my big kids and watch them be silly before they go off to school is such a treat. And it's truly one of my favorite things. And I never would have thought that I would wake up in the morning and be like, "Ah, I got to make everything work so I can walk my kids to the bus." It would historically have felt like, oh, I'm going to be late to work. And nope, I just get to experience that with them. So, um, thank you for asking. And I'm so excited I'm always excited, but I'm especially excited today to introduce our guest. And I want to make sure I say her name right. And I asked her, but then I got nervous and forgot. So Haley, correct me. It's Haley Harlan, right?
That's right. Yep.
I nailed it. And Haley and I became very fast friends when we shared some mutual experiences about burnout in our previous experiences. And she was so vulnerable at the very outset of being able to share her experience in a way that would lead to impact in sort of helping others. And so I think it's going to be a really great conversation, and I'm really excited to have her. So Haley, let's start by you telling us a little bit about sort of your legal career up until this point, and then we'll just dive right into the rest of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I went to law school and it starts there because I had my first baby in law school, which
Ah,
really
Mm,
kind
that's
of
amazing.
shaped the trajectory in my career. So
Yeah.
I had her during 3L, and that kind of shifted my focus that I was immediately like, I need to get a job that works for this family that I now have.
Right.
So I started my career as a staff attorney for the Eighth Circuit, which was a lovely experience. And then during the pandemic, as that was kicking off, my family relocated to Illinois. The Eighth Circuit sits in St. Louis. And so I moved to Illinois and became a prosecutor. And I was there for about 3 years as an assistant state's attorney. And due to the burnout that we will get into, I ended up leaving and I practiced at a temporary agency for about 6 months until I found my permanent home now as a legal services consultant at Concilio.
Yeah.
very cool.
Okay, wait. Tell me, we'll get into the other stuff. Tell me like about legal services consulting. What does that? Tell me what that means.
Yeah. So our company is cool. We kind of span the spectrum of what we do. And so we do everything from data collection to flexible talent staffing. So,
Oh,
yeah, and a lot of
very cool.
e-discovery work. And I am really passionate about it because, as we will discuss, this flexible job allowed me to take the break that I needed to reprioritize and practice law in a different way and see what else was out there. And now I get to be a part of an organization who helps people practice law in a way that feels good for them and allows them these flexible situations where they're able to use their backgrounds and their
Mm,
skills in a different way than being fully employed at a law firm or in-house. And so
Yeah.
it's a really cool circular experience to be able to have benefited so much from that and now work to help other people get the benefit of it. And then law firms and companies see the benefit of flexible talent as well.
Yeah.
no, that's fabulous.
That's really
Yeah.
impactful work, I think. And interesting because not work that would otherwise have been presented to me as a law student leaving law school. And like, I think if I remember, Sam, tell me if you remember this from decades ago.
I can't even remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, but good luck.
I don't think Sam's that much older than me, but I like to give him a hard time about it.
To our listeners, I'm so old. Okay, go on.
I could clerk for a judge. I could work for a law firm.
Oh, those are the two experiences and maybe public interest.
Oh, I
If,
Mm,
could maybe,
yep.
yeah,
Government law.
yeah, go. But even like government law, like it was like you could go work for the FBI, and I'm like, well, no one is gonna let me do that. Like, that's trust me when I say no one is gonna let me do that. So, what other options are there? And they're like, okay, well, based on your rank and where you are, you can work for a law firm, or not. And I'm
yeah,
like, okay, so the idea that there are these companies out there that are sort of focusing on flexible sort of approaches to law and more modern approaches to law, both to law firms and to making those connections. I think that's such an interesting perspective. And I wonder how long it will be before that is introduced into like law student recruiting. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Well, and there's all these just alternative jobs.
yeah,
Hmm.
Legal operations professionals.
yeah,
That is a great, you don't need a JD to do that, but it's a great JD preferred career that
yeah,
you don't discuss. And you don't really even discuss the practice of legal operations, which is so much of what practicing law ends up being. And so,
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I think there's a really big disconnect of just what the practice of law is in and of itself, especially if we're pushing folks to firms.
right.
Right.
You don't learn anything about that.
Do you,
No.
And then not even all the jobs that you could have within the legal sphere as well.
do you all feel like there is a stigma around taking or pursuing jobs that aren't at a law firm or, a prestigious governmental job or,
100%.
high-end in-house type of stuff?
Absolutely. And when I mean, I quit without a job lined up. And I
Mhm.
was so lucky to have a flexible job that allowed me to still be producing for my
Mm,
family, allowed my mind to still stay active because I
mhm.
am not a person who ever wanted to stay home. And when I left my job, every single person said, "It is so great you get to stay home with your kids now."
Oh yeah, I heard
Mm,
And
that
I
too.
said,
yeah.
"Oh no, that's not actually what I'm doing. I
Yep.
will still be working. It's just not this."
Mhm.
And so, yeah, but I did have a lot of like, I need to find the fit
Mhm.
because this isn't a forever gig. And I loved it. I was like, that I could do this forever. And that particular job wasn't available forever, but I knew I wanted to find something that felt that flexible, because having the time flexibility, the less stress flexibility, just all of that was like, this quality of life was off the table for me, I had thought. And now I
Yeah.
have this whole world open to me. And I do think a lot of people don't consider flexible positions like that as an option for that very reason. But so, don't mean to make this an ad for Flex Talent or my company, but so many of our attorneys have these incredible backgrounds that they just don't want to practice law the way that law is being practiced.
Yep.
And they're quote unquote prestigious, and the jobs that they have are prestigious. They're now working functionally in-house at these quote unquote prestigious companies. They're just doing it in a way that feels good to them and works in their life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love that. And I think that's an industry game changer. And I think the more we push it, and that's who, I mean, that's the type of talent that I use for my law firm is I have lawyers that work with and for me, but they sort of choose how many hours a week they want to work. And then they're excellent, fabulous, highly trained attorneys and produce amazing results for me. And I couldn't do it without them. So I think that's such a cool, unique way to sort of move things forward. And it's like pretty low risk, truly, and on the firm side. I mean,
Yeah.
what I don't have a lot to lose here. So okay, enough about how great all of that is. We want to talk about the hard stuff now, Haley. Because I think it's so powerful. So you left, moved to Illinois. Illinois? You put an S on the end of Illinois?
Nope, you do not put that's on the end of Illinois.
Moved to Illinois and you start prosecuting.
Yep.
And you're in like what division? Don't prosecutors have divisions?
We do have divisions. And so the way that the state's attorney's office that I was at worked is you kind of work your way up. So I started in traffic court, which goes from traffic, like a minor traffic offense, to minor traffic offenses that end in fatalities.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to note, because I was 5, 6 months into not even to a job, and you get handed a case where it's like, this is being treated as a traffic offense because it is, but also someone died, and you're still
Yeah.
responsible of coordinating with the victims and taking this as seriously as a fatality would require. And no one's happy with you, because of course the family is like, this is a misdemeanor, what are you talking about, my loved one died. And you're like,
Right.
totally understand that. Now I'm trying to explain to a layperson how
Right. But I
traffic
don't
law
write
works.
laws. Like, what do you
Yeah.
want me to do?
Right.
I only have what I have
Yeah.
here. Yeah.
And
Oh
so I
man.
started there, and I loved being a prosecutor for almost every moment that I was a prosecutor. And I thought that I was going to do it forever.
Mhm.
And I had this huge passion to work with domestic violence. And so I worked really hard and got to work in the misdemeanor domestic violence division, which I like begged for. And when I started in that position, that courtroom, which had 3 attorneys when I started in it, 2 attorneys for majority of the time I worked in it, had 1,400 cases on the
Oh,
docket.
holy cow.
That's too many
And
cases.
that's a lot of cases. And we were also told that was too many cases. And so I made it my mission to get us under 1,000 cases, which is where most of the other courtrooms were sitting. So not only did I have this huge caseload, I was like, we are working around the clock to get this
Yeah.
caseload down, because everyone is telling me that there's pressure to do so. And now I'm the first chair in this room. So we will make
Right.
that happen.
And I'm an achiever. So I will achieve.
Yeah. And at the
Mhm.
same time, not that every case that you see isn't important, but with especially misdemeanor domestic violence cases, those are cases and people that can escalate quite quickly. And so there's a range in misdemeanor domestic violence that goes from someone threw a paper and it
Sure.
hit them, to very serious allegations that could be charged as a felony or would be a felony if the person did it one more time or had a different criminal background. And
Hmm.
so each of these cases have to be screened in a very short time to be able to make sure that one of the escalating factors, such as choking, such as priors, such as a couple, an order of protection, aren't
Hmm.
there. So the state doesn't have to file this motion to revoke someone's bond, which is now different because Illinois changed. They are now a no cash bail state. So that is a little bit different, but those cases still need to be screened for other motions, such as motions to detain.
Yeah.
So you get the case and it's not up in court for 30 days, but you have to immediately see it and make sure before it's in court, you're filing the appropriate motions. Because if that person gets out and commits another offense, or God forbid,
Like kill
severely
someone.
injures or kills someone, not only is that horrific for all of the reasons involved, but then the state's attorney's office did not do their job
Oh
to
my
file
gosh.
this motion that could have prevented it.
Yeah.
So
Goodness. I mean, that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
talk
Yeah,
a
there's
lot
a ton of pressure.
Yeah.
and have
And I
historically
was like
talked.
a
Go ahead.
year into being a
No.
prosecutor at this point.
I think it's impressive to me. And you loved it. And I
It
could
was
tell
all I
just
wanted to do.
yeah, like you care so much about it. And I was a prosecutor for 7 minutes one time, for a municipal client I have. And I just was like, no. Mm-mm. And this municipal is like a city court. And I was like, no, absolutely not. I'm gonna cry all the time. I was gonna, and I'm talking like, I mean, I just can't. But what I think is so important is that we talk a lot on this podcast about the practice of law. And I think your story is so important because Sam and I are hard on big law and we're hard on the traditional approach to law, but your experience is separate from that entirely because you're in a governmental position. Right? That's the government.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you are, you can't control, like in big law, we can be like, well, you need to set boundaries and set client control so that like don't let your greed overtake the health of your people, right? You can like point at something and be like, well, don't be, it's not about the money. Okay. In your situation, you're not in control of the charging, right? These people are getting charged because there's allegedly being crimes being committed and you can't be like, hey, commit less crimes. I'm very busy. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, the
crazy.
cases are coming in faster than you can possibly review them. There's not enough people working there for various reasons. And so you're just trying to triage at all points, but you're also at that time preparing for trial. We had a
Yeah.
trial calendar 4 days a week that we had 10 or more trials set that you had to be prepared for.
That makes me want to throw up.
I
It
mean, I,
would
I'm sorry, I just glazed over because uh that's just mind blowing.
Yeah.
yeah,
I
it was.
mean,
And it's such a disservice to all of those cases as well. And this is not the prosecutor's
right,
office's fault. They do, oh, I have nothing bad to
right,
say about this office
Right.
or
right.
It's
being
the
a
I mean,
prosecutor
system.
generally.
you and your
But
colleagues do the
yeah,
best you can with what you have, but I mean, there's only so much of you to go around.
right. And so a case that the victim, we called 4 times and they said, I'm not coming. I don't ever want to talk to you. That's the case that gets the lowest priority. If that
Right.
victim has a change of heart and comes to court that morning, you very well still might be going to trial that
Yeah.
afternoon with that
Yeah.
victim. And you've not once, besides the when you looked at it at the very
Right.
beginning to make sure it didn't have an escalating factor, you might not have spent more than 10 minutes reviewing it because this
Oh
wasn't a
my
trial that was
goodness.
going, and you
Right.
had 3 others that might go to a jury.
Right. Goodness
What
gracious.
what are we missing
Hmm.
systemically? What are we resources? Resources. I mean, these attorneys,
Yeah.
people, we need people who can do, who are willing to do the job, have a passion for the job, but can get equitably paid for taking on that level of trauma and stress while managing. Because if you had more time and you could take on an actual fair amount of cases and then also get the level of mental health support that you would need to take on that type of work, is that what makes it sustainable? I mean, it's just this is like an unsustainable scenario that's being created that has like a need. Like we can't not have prosecutors. We can't.
Right. Right. And so, yeah, I think as are all the complicated problems, I think it's so multifaceted, but I think for sure resources. And I think the advent of body cams is absolutely wonderful. And Illinois passed
Hmm.
a law that by, I think 2027, maybe, could be wrong about that, that all police jurisdictions have to have body cams, which is awesome. However, it is a prosecutor's ethical duty to
Look at
review
it. Mhm.
Oh my gosh.
all of those
Yeah.
body cams. So this workload is only becoming greater
Right.
because for a lot of cases, you might have a squad and a police report, but if you've got body cams, if there are 5 officers responding, you got
That's
five. And if
five
it's a
sets of
major
videos.
case, yeah. And so, yeah, certainly people capital. Again, I think a plug for legal services. there are all of these tools that I think the benefit of Big Law is that you have the money to
Yes.
spend on tools like AI and other analytics tools to be reviewing audio and video with those tools and then having human eyes only on what our computers have told us is relevant or might be pertinent to this case, or you could at least get an auto transcript so you could hone in on those really important parts. So I think one, adjusting our expectations of attorneys and allowing that ethically, because I think that's a question whether a prosecutor, even with those things, can rely solely on AI to be able to do that. Um, and then I think part of it's having conversations like this. Everyone knows that a prosecutor and a public defender, they're in this exact same boat.
Right.
Don't want to leave that out. Um, they don't have the resources, they don't have the funding, they don't have the bandwidth to be doing all those things. And it's really hard to say that when you're in it, because on my hardest days, when my job could tell I was struggling, I said that I was not,
Right.
because
Yeah.
I didn't want to get taken out of the room that I had worked so hard to be in. And I didn't
Yeah.
want to be taken off the career trajectory that I had worked so hard for while
Right.
I was thinking further and further and further into burnout.
Yeah. So it's like you couldn't even protect yourself at that point in time because it's like I need to protect what I'm working for, and this moment that I'm experiencing could otherwise take it all. And I also think when we're there, and what we can talk about it, but when we're there, we're not thinking rationally. We're not. We're in our survival mode. So before we get deep into that, because I know and Sam doesn't. Okay, so you're prosecuting and completely overloaded but loving it. When does it start to shift for you? When are you like is it a slow thing? We talk a lot here about how like one day I woke up and I was like, wait, I think I'm giving all of myself to something and not to the thing I want to be giving myself to. And I don't even know how I got here. What was it like that for you? Did you wake up and be like, wait, I'm too deep into this thing, or what
No,
happened?
absolutely not. It was really slow. And I will also say that for me, but I think that this is the situation for so many people, there was also life going on in the background.
Of course.
And so I am working this job that I would have never admitted this at the time. And someday my children will hear this, and I'm sorry to both of you. But if you would have asked me my number one priority, I would have said my family. But if I was being honest with myself and what my actions were showing, it was 100% my job.
Yeah.
And so I'm prioritizing this, but at the same time at home, I have a child who's experiencing what we now know is a medical crisis, and she's not getting care, and we don't know what's going on.
Mhm.
And you're up, you're working all day, you're coming home, your child is acting not in a way you expected them to at all, and you're like Googling, what do you do with when 3-year-old has tantrums that last for hours, and the
Yeah.
internet's like,
Right.
have better boundaries with your kid. And you're
Oh
like,
my God, I'm
Like,
like, I'm gonna have better
if you've got
boundaries
a
with you.
neurotypical kid that's advanced enough, that might
yeah,
work. But
yeah. And
um,
like this is a 3-year-old, and the pediatrician's like, you need to get her to sleep on her own. And I'm like,
Yeah.
right,
what do you mean? What do you mean
Yeah. Like
truly?
what reality
right,
are you living in where you go home and life works that way for you? Like,
right.
Yeah.
congratulations. Okay.
Well,
These
So
things
and
are all spiraling at the same time. This is like November, December. Also, I think around the November timeframe, I have this really serious case that also leads to a battle between my office and the PD's office. It was very, very strained over some evidentiary issues that weren't our fault, but also a very differing point of view of how to approach this case, that led to a hearing that was so contentious that both of our offices filled the courtroom with our attorneys.
wow. Like
And
wow,
clear the bench kind of
we're
situation.
like
I
West
am
Side
on the
Story. Everybody's
record.
lining up,
Yeah.
snapping along and
There
getting
was
the.
dancing.
Yes, it was full like sharks versus jets
Yeah,
situation.
she's with us. She's with us.
Oh,
Uh,
thank you for any Gen Zers that are listening. Well, go pay attention to pop culture. Go on.
Yes. Watch a musical.
Yeah.
that is pop culture. They reinvented it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
they
that's true.
did.
That's
It's
true.
pretty newer.
They did. I don't think anybody watched it, but they did reinvent it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that honestly took a lot out of me. And I was talking about this to my friend the other day, and I said, can you imagine the state that I was in because these allegations are being hurled against me from these public defenders who are trying to zealously advocate for their client, and I am trying to uphold the rights of this victim, and both of us cannot see the other person's side, and we cannot have a conversation about it because we're so dug into our point of view.
Mhm.
Right.
And for days, I am at level 10, fight or flight.
Yeah.
And I think that is not the reason for any of this, but I think that is worth noting that I think
Yeah.
most attorneys really can talk about these times in their careers that usually don't have anything to do with the case or the facts of the case, but this such a contentious relationship that made your job miserable for a
Mm-hmm.
period of
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
Most other professions do not operate in that
Yeah.
way, where
Yeah.
we try to be so mean to one another to to be
What?
good at our jobs. Like that's very
Yeah.
odd.
Yeah.
Well,
Um,
I think that you're absolutely right. And I think that when it comes to, topics like burnout, I mean, when our nervous systems are subjected to just this constant, strain and stress of just normal life, and then you add to that all the pressure and demand on a constant, unrelenting level that I know you experienced in your job and so many other lawyers do, it's like your system is constantly being asked to produce at a level that it is not designed or optimized for.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
very few people are receiving training or support to identify that, hey, this is what's going on. Like, here's
Yep.
how to identify it, and here's how to do something really healthy for yourself. And we're not designing systems that enable us to thrive in those settings, when it comes to like the allocation of resources, all of those types of things. And I think that that's something that we've got to do a better job of. I mean, because when we put attorneys, when we ask so much of attorneys, especially in public service, to go out and deliver all of these results, to uphold something as sacred as the delivery of justice through our system of government, um, and we do it in this way where there's like no margin left. Like there's not. Like good luck. Like I hope
Yeah.
you're okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
We tie their hands behind their back and then
right.
say, get out there and represent the state.
Right. And go pretend like everything's okay. And remember that if you screw up on these completely unrealistic and unreasonable demands, that you're going to be shamed. You might be, called out publicly. The public's going to hate you. The victim's going to hate you. The defendant's going to hate you. All this other stuff. I mean, that's just, a recipe for burnout and mental health issues. I mean,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. So that is occurring, and that's a great point. Because at that time, of course, my coworkers were very, very supportive of like, you're right, and go do it. But there, yeah, of course, there's not this conversation of like, hey, is
Right.
this
Are you
really
okay?
significant fight over a really significant case that had like very bad things occur in it? Are you more than just mad?
Yeah. Like,
Like,
or is there some more going? Is there something deeper?
yeah, and how could there not be? So
Right.
this is all occurring, and then we get to December, and in December, I fell asleep at the wheel 5 minutes from my home and crashed my car with my daughter
Mm.
inside.
Mm.
I
Oh my gosh.
drove into a road sign literally on my street. And, thank God that is all that happened. And thank God that road sign was there because it was about 2 feet away from a tree that I
Mm.
would have hit had it not been there and woken up in time. Um, but I remember like coming to and just being like, oh my goodness, like how could that happen? And I remember 5 seconds ago. So
Yeah.
how could my body have just shut down that way? And so, of course, because I'm still not recognizing the problem, I'm like, I must have a sleep disorder. I am exhausted all of the
Of
time.
course,
This
the problem is
Right.
must
not the
be,
job.
No, it's not the cortisol. It's not the stress. I just
Yeah.
am not getting enough rest.
yeah.
Goodness gracious.
And I'm a yapper.
Mhm.
And so I tell everyone about this because I can't not tell people that I just crashed my car. That's because again, I
Right.
still think that this is like a little bit silly that I just crashed my car 5 minutes from my house. Um, And I had people say, like, you might not want to tell everyone about that because then people might think that you're like not doing well.
And you're like,
And
what do you
it's like,
mean?
Right.
I,
So
Well,
so
and
let
in
me
retrospect, it's so funny because it's like,
get
I'm
this.
not.
Let me get this. Let me get this right. So instead of the reaction being like, "Hey, are you doing okay? Is
I
there
mean, there
something
was
we can
that
do
too.
to help?"
I don't want to say there wasn't,
Sure.
but yeah.
But
But it was like,
at least in part, people were like, "Hey, don't tell anybody about this because then they might think that you're not okay, and
mhm,
then that'll be bad for you and bad for us."
yeah,
Or and
Yeah.
how disassociated you have to be
Right.
from your own experience to be like to not be able to I mean, and only I can only say that because I've been there, because I've
yeah,
been in that exact
Yeah.
spot where I'm
Yep.
so disassociated from my
Same.
own experience that it has to be something else. It cannot be all of the things
Right.
that I don't want it to be. Even if it's like tinkling
yeah,
along back here, I'm like, it's not work. It's not the
Right.
choices I'm making.
right.
It's not what the expectations of other people it's not the balls I'm
Yeah.
dropping. I'm definitely have a sleeping disorder.
Well, because
Yeah,
burnout almost never happens because you go from working, 35 to 40 hours a week to working 95 hours a week. I mean, it happens. Well, let me speak as an authority on the matter. No, let me speak
Mhm.
as far as my own personal experiences and what I've observed in others. It seems to me that it largely happens because of the accrual over time of all of these things that add a toll on our system that happen so incrementally that we just don't realize them.
yeah,
It's not like one day it's like, oh my gosh, well, all of a sudden I just, it's not like if you taste food that's bad, right? And then you just spit it out because all of a sudden there was nothing in your mouth, and then you put it in your mouth, and you're like, oh, that's disgusting, right? Just watch my kids. That's what happens. Um,
That's what
it's
Georgia
like
does.
just a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time, and then all of a
Yep.
sudden, and it's not the little things because we're trained to look for changes,
yeah,
and these aren't perceived as changes usually. And so it's like, hey,
right.
what is in proximity to this, right?
And when you're telling people, like, are you stressed? Well, of course I'm stressed. I'm a mom, I'm an
Yep.
attorney,
Yep.
I
Right,
am involved in all of these organizations, and no, I don't sleep enough, so it makes sense that I'm tired.
Right.
It's
right,
like you can attribute it to all of these things, and there, yeah, there isn't one moment for me
right.
that was like, you are in burnout. It was just this eventually, thankfully, I was able to realize it. But honestly, largely because I went to every doctor under the sun and they said, like, you have a slight vitamin D deficiency. And I ended up
Girl.
having Lyme disease and stuff. But, it was, they were like,
Sure.
Do you want to
this
join us
is,
on an episode about the deficiencies in our medical system next?
I would love to. As a chronically ill
Yeah.
person, with a disabled child, I would be thrilled to be on that
Mm.
episode as well.
Oh
But
goodness. Yeah.
yeah, so this sleep doctor that I finally got into, which, of course I had to fight to
Hmm.
get into, was
Right.
like, you have absolutely no indications of sleep problems.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that's weird.
Right.
Yeah.
And he didn't give me the answer, but very much was like, you're probably very tired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was. And so the way that it works when you get moved up, I was in this misdemeanor room and I got moved up to felony, which is what you want because you want to be in a
Right.
courtroom. And
Right.
so I'm in there and I'm like, this will be good because when you start in felony, although they're serious cases, generally they're not the more violent cases because a violent felony is typically a very serious case and it's handled by very serious attorneys who have been practicing for a very long time. Um, and I could not get with the program, honestly. I've never had a time period in my work where I've been like, can't do these very basic things, but I
Yeah.
was just honestly not very good at very administrative things that I should have had no problem with. And I was like,
Right.
gosh, I'm making all these mistakes. What is going on? And I'm not even enjoying this anymore. Like, what is happening? But I'm trying to show everyone that I'm okay and
Right.
that I'm doing
Mm.
great. And I get assigned to my first murder case, which is really exciting. That's what you've been dreaming of. And I get this case and it's horrific. And I keep putting off looking into it, which was a very weird experience for me because
Mm.
if I get
Right.
something I'm excited about, I'm digging into it. And I was just like, I'm gonna take a break and like not look at it until I need to. And the day that I am supposed to talk with my case team with the state's attorney about the facts of the case, so I need to be very dialed into it, is coming up. And the night before I couldn't put it off anymore, I had a panic attack. And I was like, I cannot review this case and I cannot do this anymore.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I couldn't sleep. And I just was like, I don't know what to do, but I know that I cannot unsee this and I cannot do it. And so my husband came home super late for work, I think, from work, and we didn't get to talk. And luckily, I worked with one of my very best friends at the time. And I walked into the building and just told her how I was. And everyone was like, "You have to quit." And I was like, "I have to quit.
Yeah.
There's no
Mm.
other option. I
Right.
am in such a bad place that I have to quit." And my
Good for
lovely,
you.
lovely friend texted my husband so that he was not floored when I said and he knew I wasn't in a good place, but
Mhm.
obviously that's a huge thing. So she
Yeah.
texted him to make sure he would be like, yeah, you do. So when I had that conversation with him, he was like, absolutely, you do need to quit. I've been waiting for
Right.
this. And I quit the next day. I could not wait one
Amazing.
more day. And
Yeah.
they were dumbfounded. And I said, I have to leave for my mental health. I'm not doing well. I have to leave for my mental health. And they were very gracious. They offered for me to take a leave of absence, but at that time it was so clear to me
Mm.
that there was no break that was going to be sufficient. And
Yeah.
in all likelihood, I was going to get to the end of that break and be like, I can't do this. And just
Yeah.
mentally, I needed that separation
Yeah.
to figure it out because I had no no idea and no plans.
Yeah.
And
And what year was this in?
this was in 2023.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, you seem like you're doing really well now. I mean, do you
I
feel
I yeah,
like
I
the
am
healing
fantastic.
process has been that's great. Do you feel like the recovery process and the healing process has really paid off? I mean, it seems like it's really paid off for you, but I mean,
Yeah,
that stuff takes time, right?
it took time and it was hard. And there were
Yeah.
so many days
Yeah.
that luckily I was in therapy prior to this
Hmm.
revelation and I'm still in therapy. Had a wonderful therapist, had to switch because I moved, which was unfortunate, but
Mm.
have a great therapist now.
Good.
Uh, but there were days that I was like, I've been training for this for my whole life and I
Yep.
got
Right.
everything I wanted. And now I've ruined it. And I'm
Yep.
Right.
supposed to be happier. And I'm not stressed in that same way, but I'm stressed about everything else. And it wasn't this immediate, it was such
Relief.
a relief, but I
Yeah.
still was exhausted and I was
Yep.
Right.
still depressed and I was still just unwell. And I also had no direction. And a part of me was so ashamed, one, that I couldn't
Yeah.
quote unquote hack it.
Yep.
Right.
And two, that I was like, well, I can't go into big law. That's clearly not the solution here if I am dealing with burnout. So what am I
Yeah.
going to do with my life? And are my peers who all seem very successful, are they going to look at this and be like, you know, have whatever thoughts they might have about
I
it?
know.
Mm.
It
Yeah.
was it was a
Yeah.
really, really hard time, and was so fortunate to have such a wonderful support system and friends and colleagues and just so family, so many people in my life who really took the time to reassure me that they loved me for who I was as a person and they were so proud of me and happy for me for taking my health seriously.
Yep.
And that was the most important thing and everything else came after that.
I think your story is so important for people to hear because it isn't, you know, it's not a situation where there's a lot of like really ugly, terrible things to say about a system. And it's more just about this idea and the expectation that we have of lawyers and then we have of ourselves that if our score sheet, if the thing that we've always wanted shifts, and we're not paying attention internally to who we are and what we want, then it feels like a failure. And I can only say that because I remember sitting with my friends, and I had made partner. I had three beautiful children. I have a marriage that people are like, holy cow, how do how are you
Mm.
so happy? I have
It's because you're married to Harlan.
he's pretty great. I have, this beautiful book of business. I'm well regarded, all of these things, everything. I'm like running through my head, and I'm talking to my friends, and I'm like, I have literally everything I ever wanted, everything I ever dreamed of. I have. Tell me why I feel nothing. I feel nothing. I feel like I'm like, this is the end. Like, is this it? Is this the end? Like, not in like kind of in a scary way, but like we, had mentioned earlier, I would go to my therapist and I'd be like, do you ever just think about going into like a short coma? Like, if you're like, oh, if I like run into this bridge, it'll just be a coma for a minute, not anything else. And she was like, no, honey, those aren't normal thoughts. Like, that is a really unhealthy, your cortisol levels are too high. And, but I'm like, well, I have everything I ever wanted. So what do you mean? And she's like, I don't think it's what you want. And then that was a groundbreaking for me, because I'm like, what do you mean? I wrote my
Well,
whole life for this.
and for me, I also had this aspect as a woman, if I say that I cannot do this, I am showing that we can't have it all.
Yeah.
Mm,
And it was so much pressure
yeah.
to do it all. And in what you do, and agreed, like as a partner at a law firm, it's like, I don't want to step us back.
Yeah,
I
I
don't want to
really
take us
felt,
backwards.
I remember saying to my therapist, like, I feel like I am letting down the feminist cause by quitting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she reminded me that like it existed long before you and will continue long after
You're
you.
not as important as you think you are,
Yeah.
Haley.
Which is really helpful to have someone tell you that
It
like
is. It is.
actually the sun does not rise and set with you
Yeah.
and better.
Yeah.
And I also had these cases that I was heavily invested in
Right.
that there were victims that I felt like if I don't stay on this case, they might die. And if
Yeah.
I'm not checking up on this person, they might die.
Yeah.
And
Mm,
that is a pressure that one, and I will say that the office tries really hard to make you not think that, but also when it feels that all of your actions could have some impact on a person's life or death, it's really hard to separate that.
right.
And it's
Right.
also, in some cases, true that
Right.
the
Yeah.
actions of a person
Right.
involved did save or contribute to a person not living.
Right.
And so, yeah, it felt I had to get to a point where I realized that if I am letting down everyone else in the world, I will be alive because I was having really scary thoughts of even after crashing my car, like if I just had like a little one, I just had to like go to the hospital or like I don't want to, kill myself, but if it happened, like that would be
Right.
okay, which, now
Right.
I know is passive suicidal ideation. But at that time, and I couldn't even admit it because that's so scary to be thinking. And again, going back to it, you're a mom. Like
Right.
you can't be thinking about dying because you're a mom and you're trying to fight for your kids. And at that time, I was literally fighting for my kid in this medical system that wasn't helping her. And
Right.
it, yeah, it just felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. And it wasn't for one particular reason, but also there wasn't anything in my life other than the therapy that I sought out on my own that
Right.
was helping me get out of it. And frankly, a lot of people's advice is like, well, are you exercising? And it's like, no.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll fit that in
With what time? Yeah.
the everything else that I have going on. And I think that is also the thing that we struggle with burnout. And Sam and I have similar, different versions of your story, but similar story experiences, sort of traumatic moments. But it's crazy from your story, and I know from mine, like the moment that the bad thing that happened, right? Like yours is like, oh, I crashed my car. And mine was I got blood clots in both my lungs when I was pregnant with my third baby. And even after that, it doesn't click with me yet. It's like it's taking time and time and time. It's nothing's. I'm searching for every other reason as to why I'm not well, why things aren't going the way that I want. Why do I have everything I wanted? What is wrong? And I think that it's so interesting because one of the things we don't talk about when we talk about burnout, which is so important that you pointed out, is that when you get to a place of mental health where your burnout is bad, again, you're not thinking rationally. I'm not choosing. I don't feel like I'm making choices at all other than just trying to not let anyone down, not let any balls drop. But it's like, it's not that I don't care about my children or my family. It's not that I don't care about the job. It's not that it's that I'm so far gone and deep into this thing that all ways out feel overwhelming. Like even when you get to the point where you acknowledge that you have to do something different, every track to the end out of it is like, well, that's work and that's work and that's work. And I have no capacity. And I just, it takes an insane amount of courage to do what you did, how you did it, and to prioritize yourself and to acknowledge that you need that. To hell with everything else, I need to live. And that is an insanely brave choice that I think I'm so glad that you were willing to share with us. And I'm so glad you made it and that you're here because you were willing to take a second and really to make that choice for yourself and for your family. So post decision, you decide this isn't going to work, and not just isn't going to work right now. This direction in which my life was taking, which I had thought is something I always wanted, is not going to work for me for a menagerie of reasons, right? I think prosecutors are set up to fail because you don't have the resources. You're taking on too much because some of those truths are true, but it doesn't have to be so many of them. It doesn't have to be so hard. Like
you can't take the seriousness out of the job and you can't take the caseload out. So you have to find ways for mental health support, for additional funding, for funding for mental health support specifically.
Right.
For problems that are systemic, they need systemic solutions. And every solution at the time, like they wanted to get a therapy dog for the victims, but also would be great for the office. That's great, but it needs so much more than that. And it needs people to hear stories like this, and for lawmakers and for the public to know and to care, because it's not just prosecutors, it's everyone that's working in a profession like that. Like this is not even to talk about our victim advocates who are getting less than attorneys, who have a higher caseload than the attorneys, who are the ones typically fielding the interaction with the victims who are at the worst point of their life. This is the public defenders. And this is everyone involved in this system, the probation officers, everyone. And this is such a huge issue that I have now, after I've had this experience, had so many people with similar stories from all of the helping professions, really. And the answer is more focus on preventative mental health support, having that be ingrained in the job, and also not doing the job for so many hours so that you're able to have that meaningful time. Because I joke about people saying, "Did you work out?" And that's annoying when you're like, I'm fighting for my life. No, I didn't do squats. But all of the research indicates that exercise is one of the biggest preventative factors in not becoming burnt out.
And you're so right, because people said the same thing to me. Like, are you exercising? And I do exercise now every day. Like I go to the gym every morning. It is a time slot that is non-negotiable for me. You do not get me before X amount because I have to go to the gym and work out, but I'm also going to walk my kids to the bus stop. So I'm sorry, but I'm better for it. But when you're in crisis, and not like, I say that like it's not, it can't just happen to anyone. When you're in it and you feel like you're the center of the universe, right? If I'm going to let my victims down, I'm going to let my kids down, I'm going to let my spouse down, and everything falls apart if you don't do it well, you can't see any of that. And I just think to anyone that's listening, who's either experienced it or is in a situation where it feels like you're the center of the universe and everything will fall apart if you do, or if you take a minute or step away and unplug, From my experience, I am not nearly as irreplaceable as I thought that I was to almost everyone but myself and my family. Okay.
Yeah.
I left a job and was replaceable. And it's okay that I was. That, like you said, it's good to have people say that it's going to be fine without you. And to give some people relief that, it feels like it's all going to come crumbling down, but you can't replace you to yourself or to your family or to your kids.
Yeah. And I think that's just such an important point because while I finished out the 2 weeks, I, put in my 2 weeks notice and I finished those out.
Wow.
Mm.
And so, so many people were like, how can we get you to stay? You are so valuable. And what I didn't mention is I won the misdemeanor attorney of the year in December of that time period.
You are so valuable.
Like
Yeah.
and I did. When I said I wanted to get that caseload down, I did it. Like I was good at practicing law.
Right.
But um after that time period, I had a couple friends that I still keep in contact with, but none of those people who were telling me how valued I was and how much I meant to the office, those people didn't check in on me. And that's
Mhm.
not to say that they're bad people. Like those are very busy people that don't have
Sure.
time to keep up with their personal relationships.
Right.
But the office had to keep going because
Yep.
that's the nature of your job.
Yep.
And
Right. Right.
it would have kept going if I did literally run myself into the ground. People would have
Right.
been really sad, but it would have kept going. No,
Right.
court wouldn't have been canceled.
Well,
Right.
Like that's still happening.
I want to tap into one of the things you just alluded to because I think, there's going to be people that listen to this episode that might be curious about whether or not they're experiencing burnout right now. And I think that in having been in burnout myself, that there's this belief that everything's going to fall if I don't just suck it up, buttercup, and keep going. And I think the lie that we believe when we're in that place and we choose to keep pushing through once we've realized that that's where we are is that I can push through and keep going. And I don't think that for most people that that's actually true. I think all it means is that you're going to break at some point, and when you
Yeah.
do, you're going to be in much less control or ability to um smoothly as possible transition the services you provide to somebody else. I
Yeah.
mean,
I mean,
do you think
there's
that
that
that's accurate
saying,
or
yeah, there's that saying that if you don't take a break, your body's going to take one for you.
yeah, your
Mhm.
body will break
And
for you. Yes.
yeah, and that is true. And at the fallout of this, I started taking some of my health problems seriously, and my health was in disrepair. Absolute
Mhm.
disrepair because I had not been taking care of it and I felt so crummy, but wasn't a result of a particular, my leg wasn't broken. So it's really easy to pass over. And I'm having
Right.
just all of these chronic issues. And I am exhausted, partially due to burnout, but partially due to the fact that I have Lyme disease that I'm not going
Right.
to the doctor for.
Right.
Just rub some vitamin D on it, right?
It's
Yeah,
fine. It's slight
exactly.
vitamin D deficiency. You're
Yeah.
gonna be
But
fine. Go to the sun more.
I think that, yeah, because you can't see that you're
Hmm.
teetering on the edge. None of us know
Right.
when that breaking point is going to happen. And it feels like if you took a break at that moment, because everything feels catastrophic
Yep.
in that moment. So a
Hmm.
break, and you might be taking a break. There might be people listening to this that are like, I'm burned out, but I can't change my life. So I'm going to go on
Right.
vacation. And I went on vacation during this time period. And my friend who I went with, we were in Hawaii. It was beautiful, lovely time. She was like, you were so negative. Your worldview
Mm.
was so negative. And we were
Yeah.
in Hawaii,
Right.
like a free trip to Hawaii through a
Yeah.
airline mistake. And she was like, you couldn't see the beauty in any of it and you couldn't disconnect. I was fighting with a public defender on the phone from Hawaii
Yeah.
because I could
Yeah.
not disconnect. And so when you're in this phase of burnout, and I think what I now know, and I think is so important to anyone potentially experiencing burnout to know, is that there is no vacation that is going to heal your
Mm.
burnout. It is
Yes.
Hmm.
deep and systemic work,
Right.
and it's multifaceted.
Yes.
Right.
And so we should all be taking breaks, but what we should be taking
Right.
is rest. It's not breaks,
Rest.
Right. Right.
rest.
Yeah.
And
And just like you talked about with like those preventative measures, like exercise, lifestyle choices, the rest that we take, the unplugged vacations, not working from a different location, friends, especially looking at you, Big Law. But like truly taking time. I mean, because at least this is my understanding of it, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it. Um, uh, so much of like burnout and so many other issues is as a result of the unrelenting toll that we place on our systems.
Yeah.
yes,
And a way to help manage that is not always a way to help cure that.
exactly. Yeah.
And it just looks different once your body has crossed that particular level. And you're not going to know exactly what it is or when it is until you're there. But like once you think you might be there, I mean, that is time to get help. And remember that for people that are listening, that is not a sign of weakness or inadequacy. That is not a failure. That is a moment of your greatest strength.
Yep.
Because that is freaking hard.
And it's the hardest thing to do because it requires you, because it is not a band-aid fix, it requires
Mm.
you to radically change your life in some way. And it doesn't
Yes.
have to be quitting your job. I think for a lot of people
Mhm.
it is. But for some people, you can still work in the job that you're in and do it differently and
Mhm.
get the support around you that you need. But you have to change every other aspect of your life. And one of those
Right.
is you think that you're prioritizing yourself now because you're
Right.
making a selfish decision. You have to make yourself your number one priority until you are in a healing phase or no longer in burnout.
Mm.
And your whole life really does have to look like that because had I just taken a break, and early on I did think that I was just going to like take a little break and go back to
Mm-hmm.
working in the capacity that I did before. And I took a like 2-day self retreat and was like, I don't feel that much more relaxed. Like I quit my job, I
Yep.
journaled.
Right. I did a bullet journal. What do you mean? This is supposed to be healing.
Yeah. All better now. Like, hey, I
Yeah.
hope
And I
that's your
just,
story and that you can get better with the bullet journal. If not,
Yeah.
for everybody else, there's therapy and a lot of other work to do.
I could not believe how long it took, but because while I think my burnout period was particular to this, life thing, it was also all of the things leading up to that and the way that I was living my life, which
Mm,
was you have to be successful and you have to be productive and
mm.
you have to be
Yep.
involved and you have to be well regarded and you have to do all of those things at the same time. And never once can you show a
Yeah.
vulnerability.
Right. And you have to be a really good mom and you have to show up at everything and advocate while
Yeah.
also being a really supportive spouse. And you have to, it just, I think you're right. I decided to quit my job on a vacation because I was like, well, I'm gonna go on this trip and I'm gonna like,
Same.
it's gonna make me feel better. And then 3 days in, I was like, I can never go back. So I have to figure that out. And then I did, and I figured it out. But it's just, I think there you could get to it before you quit your job. You could get to your burnout or your disassociation, all those things before you flip your life over on its head. You don't have to. I recommend the full life flip. It really just, can do a number on you. But you could also start thinking now, anyone could, about what we trick ourselves into thinking is self-care. Like I used to be like, I went to the grocery store this weekend by myself without my kids. Like, look at my self-care. And my therapist would be like, that's a chore. You did a chore, Ashlyn. You did a thing that has to be
Yourself,
done.
though.
Yeah. And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, I didn't have any kids with me. What do
Sounds
you
like a
mean?
win to me.
I know. I said,
I got Starbucks on the way there,
right.
or
And
better
she's
yet,
like,
at the grocery store.
Yeah.
what is,
Two
what
for
are you
one.
doing for yourself this week? And I was like, okay. I'm gonna and she's like, right. Like we trick ourselves into thinking that these little moments we take, like I'm gonna take a bath. Like, oh, treat yourself to a bubble bath. I'm like,
I'm going to engage in basic personal hygiene.
my
Yeah.
therapist, she was like, you bathed? Your concept of self-care is that you took a bath? Like Ashlyn, really talk through what you're saying. And I think what you're saying, Haley, is so close. Like we have to
Well,
think about the way we treat ourselves. Like, what are we doing to ourselves? What is society? And I blame like hustle culture and like girl boss culture and like all these things that make us feel like we have to just keep achieving. And it's like, what if I don't want to achieve anymore?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm talking too much again, but it feels, and I want to tack on to something that you said earlier, Haley, about this sort of pressure and this expectation that I can have it all.
Mm.
And not only that, but I should have it all. And that if I'm going to be truly successful, it's not just a can, it's a should. At least I feel like that's a lot of pressure that our culture creates, especially on women in a different way than it creates on men.
Well, and
Um,
I think specifically for early identified high achieving girls,
Mm-hmm.
because
yeah.
I was, I'll say stereotypically smart. I did
Yep.
well in school. And so when you're a girl, and I grew up in the Chicago suburbs, so this is just a generally high achieving area. And so I was going to go to college. And I didn't have a like particular, I have to go to a really quote unquote good college, whatever that means. I went to the University of Northern Iowa and I had a wonderful experience there. But I thought I had a wonderful experience there because I took advantage of every opportunity given to me. And I was in all of the clubs and I was running myself ragged at
Mm,
18, 19 years old,
Yep.
being over involved, taking 22 credit hours to graduate
Yep.
early so that I could go to law school it,
Yep.
with graduating college in 3 years instead of four. And I rushed to that. I did that. And at that point, I was already starting this burnout phase. And then I got to law school and I went to WashU and I had major imposter syndrome of,
hmm.
okay, now I'm in the big leagues. I didn't go to the fancy college, but now I'm at the fancy law school. And so I have to prove that I'm deserve to be here so that no one can question it. So I have to be involved again. I was the class president and I was on the executive board of the law review because I
Mm-hmm.
have to prove that I can. And why shouldn't I? Because I have the
Mm-hmm.
qualifications to do it. And as a woman, look at me. I'm doing it and I'm achieving the thing
Yeah.
that previously we weren't able to even show up at this school.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got
Yeah.
pregnant during that time. And I could have taken a semester off, but I did not. I went back to class 2 weeks after I had a baby
Mm,
because I could not graduate 6 months later than I had previously scheduled because that would show other people that I couldn't
There's
take on
weakness.
all of the things. Yeah, that is
Mm-hmm.
weakness. Because, and what am I going to do? I'm going to stay home with my baby for 6 months?
I hear you. Mhm. And people are going to be like, and when I left law, they said the same thing to me, like, oh, it's so great that you get to go home and be with your kids. And I'm like, and even if that was a choice I was making, which is a completely respectable, amazing choice that
Yeah.
I respect the crap out of anyone making. But if anyone would suggest that's what I was doing, like my instincts would be like, ew, I would never. Like, how dare you suggest that? But like, kind of, yeah,
well,
I
well,
did leave so that I could be a better mom in a different way. It,
because it comes with this sort of unstated because you're less than,
yeah, because you can't
right?
hack it.
Well, and I feel like I mean, Ashley and I talk a lot about, have knowing and leaning into your own personal scorecard on things.
Mhm.
And I feel like so much of what's endemic to the problems with traditional law and a lot of things that we've talked about is that nobody's teaching or training, law students or young attorneys to be like, hey, you're not going to want the same things as everybody else wants.
Yep.
Like you're a real person who's going to have your own unique path. And don't measure yourself and your success by what's important to other people. Figure out what it is for yourself and go get it.
And
And don't carry around this judgment of like, well, my scorecard's not the same as everybody else, so I must be inferior. Um,
and though that your scorecard is ever evolving. And I think
yes,
that is so missed
thank
because
you.
at that time, if someone would have told me
Yeah,
that in law school, I would have said that's great and everyone should want whatever
right,
they want. But I want to be
The
X.
best. Yeah.
Yeah, I
right,
want to be the best.
Yep.
And when I wanted to be the prosecutor, I wanted to be the very best prosecutor. And I
right.
wanted that because I wanted it to lead to other things in my career that I viewed as what I wanted. And so I saw it as such a personal failing when I no longer wanted that. And I also didn't have a next stop. It
Yeah.
wasn't that I changed my mind because I decided I wanted to pursue a new opportunity. I had no idea what I wanted to pursue. And so I had to, I mean, it was not good that I was in this position, but I had to. Like, it
Right.
truly felt to me that there was no other choice because I was not going to continue to live if I stayed in that job. And I believe that with my whole heart. I would have
Yeah.
continued deteriorating until I died or I made that
Mhm.
happen.
Yeah.
And, but there were people that looked down on me for
Oh
doing
yeah.
that. I'm
Yeah.
positive of it. And there might be people that listen to this and are like, sounds like she actually couldn't hack it.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I became okay with that.
yeah.
Yep.
Well, I think that's such a fundamental misunderstanding that people have, that we're all the same. We're not. Like, I mean, I don't mean to be captain. Well, I do mean to be Captain Obvious. We're all wired so differently. I
Mm.
mean, how we process other people's trauma who are dependent upon the services that we provide in order for the outcomes that, change their lives is completely different from one person to the next. And when
Absolutely.
you try to compare somebody who, just based on their wiring, carries that in a different way than somebody who just is like, you know what, that's just not how I'm wired. I don't carry that with me. Those people are going to have completely different tolls on their nervous systems when it comes to the burden of the work that they carry around. And trying to say that they're the same just completely ignores all the things that we've learned about how differently people are wired and how differently they react to the environments in which they're placed. And it places a value judgment on it that I think is devoid of understanding of who we are as human beings and just those differences. And so if you're one of those people, get it together.
Well, and if you look at
Go to
it through
therapy.
through the lens of like physical health versus mental health, like no one ever thought I was going to be a professional women's basketball player. No one ever expected
I
that.
did, but
Well, that's too bad for you. You thought you were going to be a professional women's basketball player?
no, I thought you were.
Oh,
So
yeah, sorry to let you down.
yeah, I am too.
But I was never going to be like a a professional athlete. Probably anyone that saw me play sports as a child never had an expectation that I was going to be the very best at any of those things that I did. And yet, from the other side of things, the expectation is that even if things are mentally exhausting, draining, like some people can deal with other people's trauma, compartmentalize beautifully. That's a skill set of theirs, and move on with their lives and just like I have police officer friends who they work very tirelessly at taking care of themselves in a way that it works for them. Um, just because I'm not good at it or that's not my strength doesn't mean I have weak. That just like you said, doesn't mean I'm weak. Just because I'm never going to be a professional basketball player doesn't mean I'm not good at other things or I don't have other skills. And I think it's crazy that we like give deference to, yeah, that's just not a skill set you have when it comes to everything else in life except for achievement. Like if we're achieving, we put this pressure on ourselves to be like, why can't I compartmentalize and handle all this stress and like just be perfectly fine to be the best mom and the best dad and the best wife and daughter and all these things? And it's like, well, it's okay if someone else that looks like they're doing that. It's not a failure on your part because that's not your skill set because you can't give as much as another person can give, I guess,
Well,
is what I'm
well,
saying.
I think it's even more than skills because I mean, there's a certain amount of skills that you can acquire. I mean, you and I have talked about the Enneagram before. Are you familiar with the Enneagram? Are you
I
part of this
am.
cult yet?
And
Oh,
now I
thank
feel like
God.
I've got to look up what I am because I forget
Yeah.
everything.
But I mean, one of the things that was so useful in my marriage a number of years ago when my wife and I started, getting deeper into understanding the Enneagram and how it helped us understand ourselves is this whole idea of difference without defect.
Yeah.
That I mean, people are just wired differently. Like we carry and we experience things differently. And I think that that's something that when we view and understand the people we work with and help them, especially in moments of crisis, understand and process and react in as healthy a way as possible to mental health challenges or whatever, is to bear that in mind, is that your journey and experience is not going to be the same as mine because
Mhm.
we're wired differently and you
Yep.
bring a whole different set of experiences to the table than I do.
Yep.
And as a result of that, something that might just roll off my back is going to be life changing for you. And that if we're viewing everybody as like, oh, well, you should just go exercise and stuff instead of, I mean, maybe I'm sure that that's part of it, but instead of pausing and asking the question of, first and foremost, like, hey, the same way we would analyze a legal problem, like, let me ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
Don't let's just start with the solutions. Let me ask questions and
Right.
understand this better, so that I can actually provide a thoughtful response.
Well, and I think that's something that's really missing from law school because I
Preach.
Mm-hmm.
had anyone in my life like really understood what being a prosecutor was going to be like. Anyone who knows me really well, I think probably could have guessed that I could not do that for a long-term career because I feel things really deeply and I care about them really
Mm,
deeply, and I am not satisfied until I have fixed the problem in my mind.
mm.
And oddly enough, I solely can't fix the domestic violence problem that the world has had since its inception.
Well, I'm really disappointed in you, frankly.
Yeah,
That's what
I
I thought you
know
were here to do.
it is
that's harsh,
wild,
Ashlyn.
actually. But I took criminal
Yeah.
law in law school and I worked at a personal injury firm where I saw really horrific things. And I did these things that I thought like readied me for this experience. But that's different than every day for 10 plus hours a day being intimately acquainted with the worst moments of people's lives and seeing depravity
Yeah.
happen, and also living there, working in that community, being able to pinpoint every location that you view as now not safe because you know a
Mm,
violent thing has occurred there, knowing that your children cannot do X, Y, and Z because of the increased danger that you know that they're
Mm,
in. All of these things, people that know me knew that I could not do that because it was going to be too much for me.
yeah.
But no one could have said that, of course, because I would have
right.
been, of course I can. But you're right that people could have asked questions about, hey, remember this time that one of your like kind of acquaintancy friends passed away really unexpectedly and you felt it really deeply for months? Like
Yep.
that,
Yeah.
I think that indicates that I'm a person that cannot segment that out. And
Yep.
like
Yeah.
I get really upset at the news.
Yep.
And
Me too.
and
Yep.
so I don't there's no skill set I could have been taught
Right.
to, and I thought that was a defect. I thought other people are able to correctly like break their brains apart and not feel this so
Yeah,
deeply.
but you're an empath. So
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can't.
And I
I'm an
am.
empath. I can't either. I
Yeah.
can't. I take on, there are people who don't feel other people's problems. It's shocking to me.
They're sociopaths.
I don't know how they wake up every day and they like don't take on the way everyone else is feeling in the room. But for those of us who can't do that, I realized that very quickly, and I'm just shocked and honestly so impressed with you that you were able to do it as long as you did. Because, like I said, I was a
Yeah.
prosecutor for like 7 seconds, and I was like, absolutely not. Like,
It's because I wanted to be tough. Like
yeah,
truly,
Right.
in all the work
yeah,
that I've done, it is because I had such a core fear of not being seen as strong that
Mm.
no
yeah.
matter how much it impacted me, I would not say that it did because I had to be perceived as tough.
Do you
Well,
think it would have been different if somebody had helped you identify early on how the experience was going to impact you and prepared you from an expectation level to say, hey, this is what you're going to go through, and just based on how you're wired and the demands of the job and all of that, and here's some tools to help you prepare yourself uniquely to have a great experience, take care of your mental health, and thrive in this setting, or to decide maybe this isn't for you.
I think there's a couple problems there. I think the
Yep.
people that can have that conversation are not the people that are dealing with what I was dealing with. There's a set
Mm,
of people who should not be in helping professions, not because they're not wonderful helpers, it's because
right.
they cannot separate themselves from that. And
Mhm.
it will
Yep.
weigh too heavily on them when
Yep.
they are not working, that it will produce burnout. I
Right.
truly believe that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. That's
People that
excellent
give you
point.
career advice for a helping profession career are the people who have been in that career for a long time. So
Yeah.
I talked to prosecutors and public defenders and
Hmm.
judges and people who were in that system. But if they have stayed for 30 years, I
Right.
have to imagine they have the ability
Right.
to not carry that so heavily with them. They carry it. Like
Yeah.
Of
they do,
course.
but it's
Yep.
so different. And then also, I think that that question is it's really more of a personality and a wiring question
Hmm.
that law school and college and high school, I think it even goes back to, we're not addressing those kinds of questions.
Yep. Yeah.
And so there, when we're thinking about what should I do with my life for, and I think this is a little bit gendered, but as a caring, helpful woman, the helping profession makes sense to me because that is who I am to my core. And there's not an avenue for someone to say, hey, I want to take a step back. Like people talk about how much things will impact you and then how you have to develop skills to make sure it doesn't. But no one ever said to me that there are some people that aren't able to create that separation. And when that was said, it was like they weren't able to make that separation, so they weren't able to do it.
Yeah.
But
And you didn't
not
want
in
to
a
hear
like,
that you couldn't do it. You just
Right.
wanted to, you could do it. You did do it. You can do it. It just hurts. And like it's okay that it hurts. And this conversation makes me feel a lot better about the time that I had a 1L clerk and she was at my law firm and we were in a deposition about something and she cried. And then I brought her back into my office and I sat her down. I'm like, hey, walk me through like what was so emotional about this experience. And she said, I just really struggle like when other people are going through something hard, it just like is really overwhelming to me emotionally. And I was like, okay, so if we're picking areas of law, because this was like a med mal case or something where like it's just like very heavy and sad. Like this is one where people feel a lot of things. You have to hear about really feely things. And I said, maybe, we should focus on the areas of law that are like more transactionally and like less sad and more just about money. And then I felt kind of guilty because like I wasn't trying to direct her away from something that may be good for her, but I could very clearly see in her that she could feel it. And I can't do that type of work either. So like, I just want you to know it's okay. And it sounds like we need more of that, more of people, empaths who can feel things and be like, I'm really good at my job. I don't say that to be anything other than I know who I am, what I'm capable of producing, and what I'm good at being good at. And it's because of that empathy that allows me to be good at my job. But it wouldn't make me good at another being a prosecutor. I wouldn't. It would
right.
hurt too bad. And I want to also say, I think you are incredibly tough. I think you're tough,
Agree.
way tougher than I can even imagine. And I'm so glad and to have had this opportunity to chat with you. And I just appreciate your vulnerability and your honesty, and you're going to change people's lives by just being able to be honest about an experience that you've had. And I'm so glad for it. And I'm so glad that we connected. And the final thing that we always ask people on this podcast before we let you go back to this life that you've built for yourself is if you could identify something for our listeners beyond all of the unbelievably helpful advice you've already given us, that would help us work towards this idea of better law, practicing law better. What would that be? What would it look like?
I think one of the things that kind of came up during this conversation, it was like a really minor point, but I started making really uncharacteristic mistakes.
Mm.
And that was seen as like, what's going on, but not in a what is going on deeply with you at your
Right.
core. And I think I've heard that in a lot of burnout stories that like I was dropping balls that I previously did not drop. And I think that there is this tendency in law when someone, especially someone who's been so great, starts dropping a ball to be like, you have to do better. What is
Right. Pick
happening?
your
You're
balls
making,
back up.
yeah, yeah. Why are you dropping the balls? We've always
Mhm.
relied on you to not
Right.
drop balls.
Right.
And I think that
Yeah.
most tangibly, I think everyone listening will experience at some point someone in their life who is
Yeah.
really uncharacteristically missing deadlines or misfiling
Mhm.
something or just making it honestly usually an administrative mistake. And I think that you should really question where that person is and what's contributing to it, because it is likely not that this person suddenly doesn't care. It is likely that
Right.
this person is experiencing some sort of crisis. And the best thing that you could do for that person is give them the ability to figure that out and figure out what they want to take forward from that.
Yeah. Those are
Yeah,
excellent, excellent points.
totally.
Yeah. Haley, thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Well, thank you
Um,
for giving me this space. I
yeah.
I was so happy to be able to do this, and I truly do hope that it helps at least one person recognize those early symptoms so they don't get to the point where they're crashing their car.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I too hope for that, I think, which I think is a true, I think it will be accomplished, because I think just the way you communicate about it and how practically you can approach it while still being sort of thoughtful and vulnerable about it is really beneficial. And I hope that you continue to share your story, because again, I think it's such an important one. And fortunately, we're not telling it as a story about you after you died in a car crash. We're not like, here's a sad story that came from a burnout. We're telling it, you are getting to tell your story because of how tough you were and brave you were in dealing with it. So,
Yeah. And I mean, for all of our listeners, I mean, remember that these are stories of strength.
yeah.
I mean, Haley's story is a story of strength. Um, it- there's a lot of progress on the mental health front in our culture, but I mean, especially in the legal industry, there's so many barriers to that vulnerability, that transparency of saying like, "Hey, something's not right. I need help." And being willing to do that is an incredible sign of strength. And so, kudos to you. If your kids ever listen to this episode, which I mean, keep a copy on cassette tape, whatever. Um, uh, I mean, to your kids, your mom is hella strong.
Yeah.
Which I mean, they won't get that reference, but
No, I'll be like, ugh,
I mean,
cringe.
you are so strong. Like your kids' lives are so much better because you had the strength to be like, hey, I'm not okay, and I'm going to do something about that. Because some people would have figured out like how to just like keep prolonging it and brushing it off until they reached a point where they wouldn't be in the position that you're in today.
Yep.
And so kudos to you and all of our listeners. If you need help, remember that any of us here, I'm sure on this episode, I know me and Ashlyn, I'm sure for Haley as well. If you need help and you just need somebody to talk to, please reach out, get help. We'll post about resources here in the links. But just remember that your decision to get help is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of unbelievable strength. And you should feel really, really proud of that, even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment. So,
Yeah.
Absolutely. And your life will change for the better when you take that incredibly hard step to get
yes.
that help. And so, anyone who does, I'm so proud of you. And I look
Mhm.
forward to you being on the other side of it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now I have goosebumps, and just feel so empowered after this. So thank you so much again for agreeing to be here and sharing your story. And I'm confident this is not the last time we will speak and talk about it. So,
Absolutely. Well, I look forward to it.
yay. Okay.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Bye.